It's April 14, 1865. Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States, is watching a play at Ford's Theater. A lone assassin, John Wilkes Booth, slips into his private box, raises a small pistol, and fires. But in our story, the bullet only grazes the president's scalp. The wound is serious, but it's survivable. Booth is captured almost instantly. The Civil War is over. The Union has been preserved. And the architect of that preservation, the man with arguably the greatest moral authority in American history, is alive. This single moment could have prevented decades of chaos, political infighting, and racial violence. The question isn't just, what if Lincoln survived? But what if Lincoln finished his term and shaped the future of America the way he intended? Welcome to the timeline where the United States was rebuilt by its original architect. In reality, Lincoln's assassination was the ultimate tragedy. It transformed a national leader into a martyr and threw the nation into immediate mourning and political turmoil. His vice president, Andrew Johnson, took over. Johnson was a Southerner who was completely unfit for the presidency and deeply hostile to the idea of protecting the newly freed slaves. His time in office was a disaster. He fought bitterly with Congress, was impeached, and his soft approach to the defeated South allowed former Confederates to quickly regain power and start a campaign of systemic terror against Black Americans. The period of Reconstruction, which should have healed the nation, became one of the most chaotic and painful eras in our history. In our alternate timeline, Lincoln survives the attempt. He spends about a month recovering, but he returns to the White House to find himself immediately confronting the massive, complex task of rebuilding a fractured nation. The emotional contrast between our two timelines is immediate and profound. In our reality, the nation's grief fueled the anger of the radical Republicans in Congress, pushing Reconstruction toward a punitive military occupation of the South. In this timeline, Lincoln's survival provides the necessary moderate check on that anger. He has an almost spiritual authority that Andrew Johnson completely lacked. This allows Lincoln to steer the nation toward his original vision, the 10% plan. This plan favored a quick and relatively gentle reconciliation, bringing Southern states back into the Union once just 10% of their voters swore an oath of allegiance. The constant, paralyzing feuds between the White House and Congress that defined the actual Reconstruction era are largely avoided. Lincoln's presence ensures a stable, unified vision from the executive branch. This allows the North to consolidate its political and economic victory without all the internal bickering that slowed everything down. So how does this play out? Let's break down the rebuilding of the Union into phases. First, political stability and the power of the veto. The survival of Lincoln means the survival of his moderate Reconstruction policy. The radical Republicans who were so eager to punish the South and impose military rule find their agenda constantly challenged by a president who is immune to their personal attacks. Lincoln, unlike Johnson, was a master at dealing with Congress. He would use his political capital to veto the harshest bills designed to strip the South of its political representation. At the same time, he'd use his moral authority to make sure the brand new 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, was strictly enforced. Andrew Johnson, the man who nearly broke the system, remains vice president and is never impeached, sparing the country the worst of its political crisis. This stability allows the U.S. government to focus its energy not on internal political warfare, but on economic expansion and national healing. Phase 2. Social rights and the Freedmen. While Lincoln was a firm abolitionist, his views on political and social rights for the newly freed black population were complex and cautious. He publicly supported limited suffrage, meaning voting rights for black Union veterans and those who were educated, but he wasn't pushing for immediate universal suffrage for all. So in this timeline, Reconstruction would likely be slower when it comes to the 14th and 15th Amendments, which granted citizenship and voting rights. However, and this is a huge difference, the enforcement of civil rights would be much stronger and more consistent than it was under Andrew Johnson. The Freedmen's Bureau, which helped former slaves with food, housing, and education, would receive far stronger federal support under Lincoln. This might lead to a slower political transition, but a much stronger and less violent economic transition for black communities. This could have laid a much better foundation for economic independence, possibly preventing the years of terror and the eventual establishment of Jim Crow laws. Phase 3, Geographic Expansion and Legacy. Once the Union was secured, Lincoln's focus would have shifted to the vast Western territories. With a stable political system, he could push forward his vision for the Transcontinental Railroad and the settlement of the plains much more efficiently. His survival transforms the very idea of American identity. He remains the unifying figure who didn't just win the war, but actually healed the nation. His legacy becomes one of reconciliation and measured progress, not martyrdom. The U.S. military, instead of being used to police rebellious southern states as it was under Johnson, is demobilized sooner. Its resources are then directed towards industrial expansion. The nation avoids the political radicalization of the late 1860s and early 1870s, establishing a tradition of strong yet compassionate central federal authority. Now imagine living in a country where the most difficult crisis in its history was ended not by an angry, chaotic political void, but by the steady, guiding hand of its greatest leader. There would be a profound sense of national gratitude and emotional completion. The deep wound of the war would begin to heal much sooner because the architect of the Union was there to personally supervise the rebuilding. But there is a cost. The Civil Rights Revolution would face a slower, more deliberate path, guided by political pragmatism rather than the radical demands of Congress, and this leads to the ultimate moral compromise. Was stability and less violence worth the delay in achieving full equality for all citizens? This scenario forces us to look beyond historical tragedy and examine the complexities of political compromise. And now I have a question for you. Given that Lincoln's survival likely meant less violence but slower progress on civil rights with the 14th and 15th Amendments, would you have preferred this slower, more stable Reconstruction timeline over the chaotic, punitive one that actually happened? Why or why not? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really curious to see what you think. The survival of Abraham Lincoln would have redefined Reconstruction, set a new template for American leadership, and given the nation a much-needed period of stable healing. A single missed bullet would have changed the foundation of the modern United States. If you enjoyed this look at one of the most critical turning points in American history, make sure to subscribe. We explore a new what-if scenario every week, challenging everything you thought you knew. Next time, we're tackling a political thought experiment that terrifies historians. What if America became a monarchy? You won't want to miss that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next timeline.